Barakatah Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem Ruach Kodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is The New Moon is Not the Full Moon. And pretty much this lesson was inspired by this video that Elder Pastor did. I actually watched it this morning, the whole thing, from beginning to end. And it inspired me to do a little something on it. I mean, it's nothing new that you brothers that have been watching and studying for a while don't know. Scriptures we're gonna go through are all the same, as you brothers already know about. But we have to keep going over things like this because you have new members and Israelites waking up every day, and they have to be taught the truth, and this is the true definition of the defenders of the gospel. So, as you already know, this video, which was hosted by Vocab Malone, and you had Sarnetta there, Sarnetta, and pretty much, they were showing certain clips of Deacon Nathan going into breaking down how the new moon was when the moon was so-called dark. It wasn't really dark, but the light isn't as bright as it is when it's full, because there's no such thing as a dark moon. But the reason why we say dark moon is because the new moon, you really can't see it even though the light is still there, because they were created as lights in the beginning. But what they failed to mention was when you go back, they weren't established as the primary lights of the world. They were just pretty much so you could understand, to accentuate what was already set up, because they were created on the 4,000th year. When we go to Genesis 1:1, it says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. This word God here, when you go to the Hebrew, it's Alahayim, which Allah is God. Yom at the end makes it plural. Alahayim is Yahushai and the angels that created, what we see today as far as the earth is concerned, trees, flowers, so on and so forth, animal, cattle, people, so on and so forth. All right, that's a whole nother lesson. It says, and the earth was without form and void. What does that mean? That the earth was without form and void, meaning, that the earth was in its elemental stage. Everything that we see is created up of elements. You put certain elements together, bring them together, they create different things. All right, so the earth was there, but it was just in its elemental stage. And darkness was upon the face of the deep being space. All right, and the darkness being upon the face of the deep because everything was dark. It says, and the spirit of the powers moved upon the face of the waters. The waters represent the elements. So they moved upon these elements, right? And the power said, let there be light. And there was light. So they illuminated these, these elements. All right. So then from darkness, you had the light, and when you look under, I'm not sure the type of lighting that it is, you could see certain elements, they all have a particular type of glow to them, because that's how it was created in the beginning. So in this darkness, the Yahushua and the angels created a light, and the light illuminated all of these different elements, right? And the power saw the light that it was good, and the powers divided the light from the darkness. So what they did was half of it was light and half of it was darkness. And they actually separated the two, one from the other, right? Now, I'm not sure what it's called, Dateline something. Those ships that cross international waters. And sometimes you could see the ship part in the day and part in the night, because that's how the Lord set it up. One side was darkness and the other side was light. This is why you'll see a ship crossing international waters, and half of the ship will be in the daytime and the other half will be in the nighttime. Just like you might be driving somewhere and it might be pouring, cats and dogs, raining, and then all of a sudden it just stops, because that's that those clouds of rain going at one section, and then once you get to a certain point, it's not there. So there was a division between the darkness and the light, so you could understand. So light was already there before the sun, the moon, and the stars were even created, because this is all within the first 1000th year. And the power is called the light day, and the darkness he called night. That's why we have what? Day and night. And the day begins when? At the nighttime. And it follows the trajectory, for lack of better words, of it was darkness, then the light was created. You know, that's why it says here, and the evening and the morning were the what? The first day. So the day starts in the evening, and then when the morning comes up, that's the first day. Once the evening comes in again, then that would be the beginning of the second day. So a day starts in the evening. When we go to, it says the first day, right? When we go to 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8, but beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. So this took 1,000 years. Remember, the Heavenly Father's time is different from our time. The Lord said, you know, because these individuals at the IUIC, they get mad because they say, well, if the sun and the moon and the stars were created on the fourth day, how can that be the beginning, you know, of the Sabbath, when the Lord established the Sabbath? Well, the Lord said, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither my way your ways. And before this is all created, before man was even created, man wasn't even created until the 5,000th year. And then in the 6,000th year, that's when the Lord set man in order. You see? So this is the Most High's Sabbath, the way he set it up. Then he, you know, projected that to us. But that didn't happen until, you know, the Lord actually established and set up Moses, gave him the law, statutes, and commandments, and within that he explained the Sabbath to him. So that's when the Sabbath is really fully established for us, even though it was created from the beginning. All right? It's not that hard. Right? So now let's jump down to the 14th verse. It says, and the power said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night. Right? Because you had the light already, you had the darkness already, you had day and night. We just read that. If you negate that, then you're negating the scriptures. Then he had the lights, which is the sun, the moon, and the stars. This is how you would determine when it's daytime, when the sun is out, and when it's nighttime, when the moon is out, when the stars are out. All right? And let them be for what? Signs, and for seasons, and for days and years, because they establish time. But they never taught about no dark moon. They just said, you know, the new moon, you know, they really didn't, from what I remember, they really didn't speak on saying if it was dark or not. I don't really remember, to be honest, you know. But when you actually see the moon when it's new, you know, it's actually, it looks like a dark moon, but it's not really dark, because we're just reading here that they were lights in the firmament of the heaven, and one of those lights being what? The moon. So it's not a dark moon, it's just not as bright, so you could understand, because it's still a light no matter what. And let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years, because this is how time is established. You know, this is why the scripture that Bishop Nathaniel went to, that tried to say that this is actually dealing with the new moon being the full moon, is a total farce, a lie, you know, because if the new moon is the beginning of the month, how can the new moon be the full moon, and the Passover is kept on the full moon at the 14th day at evening, which is the middle of the month, you know? And even when you go to a let's just type in phases of the moon. Let's go to images. Let's see if we can find a good one. Here we go. This is perfect. Matter of fact, let's get this one. Let me open this up. Just bear with me. Here we go. All right, so here you got the phases. Well, the calendar was kept based off of, the vernal equinox, which was the beginning of the month in the spring. That's how it was kept, because High Priest Ariel used to set up the calendars every year, and then eventually it was passed down to Elder Apostle Tahar, so on and so forth, as you see it today. I heard Tahar say Ariel told everyone to feast, but was he using moon cycles or something else? Do you know? Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure he was using the new moon, because how else was he able to calculate when the 14th day at evening would come? From what point? They were going from the new moon, because that's the new moon is the beginning of the month. So yeah, that's how it was established. All right, so as we see here, we got the different phases of the moon. You have the new moon, which is still a light, but you see it's not as bright. So some people call it a dark moon. It's not really a dark moon. It's really light, but it's just dim. How you have a dimmer? You can dim the light. You can turn it up or down. Well, that's what the new moon is. The new moon is pretty much a refreshing or a resetting of the moon to let you know that the cycle was complete. And now it's about to begin all over again. This is why when you would see the first little sliver, that this is the light waxing, which is growing. All right. Then it will go to the waxing crescent, the first quarter. Then by the time it got to the middle of the month, which is around the 14th day at evening, that's when the full moon will come. This is the perfection of the moon. And then from this point on, it would wane, meaning it would go down, and the light would decrease until it resets again during the new moon. It's not that hard, And we're going to read this here in Ecclesiastes 43. But before we read that, let's go to Psalms, the 81st chapter. Psalms 81, let's just go straight to the point. It says, blow up the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed on our solemn feast day. And this is one of the scriptures he tries to use to say that the new moon is the full moon, because when it says in the time appointed, when you look up the time appointed, the word there is kasa'ah, which is full moon. But what he doesn't understand is that there were different times when you would blow the trumpet. You would blow the trumpet at new moon, and you would also blow it at the full moon, because the full moon was a sign of feast days. Two of the main high holy days we keep around that time would be the Passover, and it would be the Feast of Tabernacles. All right, they would fall in the middle of the month. When you look up that word appointed, it means full moon. But when you look up some of these other translations, CSB, for instance, it says, blow the horn on the day of our feasts, during the new moon, and during the full moon. It's just that simple. But when you read the King James Version, it seems like it's saying that the new moon is the appointed time and the feast day. But no, the new moon is a Sabbath. The new moon is the first day of the month. The new moon dictates the rest of the time for the month. And this is why it decreases and increases in light. And this is how we kept our calendar in the past. 1 Chronicles 12 and 32 spoke about the Issacharites, and of the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times, because they were able to look at the times and they were able to calculate, by the different phases of the moon, where we were at in time, what time of the month it was, when the high holy days would be coming in, when the feast days would be coming in, and this is another proof that the so-called Mexicans, the Incas or Mayans or whatever you want to call them, are also Israelites, because these they had something called the Mayan calendar, I believe it was called, if I'm not mistaken, where they had the different phases of, of time. They were timekeepers, pretty much. All right. It says, to know what Israel ought to do, the heads of them were 200, and all their brethren were at their commandment, right? Because they were the timekeepers. They were the ones that established time. And this is why the month is called after the moon, because the word month and moon are synonymous one with the other. Why? Because the moon is what dictates time. So it says, Ecclesiastes 43:6, he made the moon also to serve in her season for a declaration of times. See? Because this is what would dictate time, the declaration of times and a sign of the world. From the moon is the sign of feast. Why? Because the moon would be the beginning stage where you would calculate for the month what you ought to do and when these different feasts were to be set up. A light that decreaseth in her perfection, right? Because when the moon is new, it's at its lowest or its dimmest. Then it begins to increase. The month is called after her name. It decreases. When it's a new moon, it's decreased or dim. It says the month is called after her name, increasing wonderfully in her changing. Because from the moment that the moon is the dimmest, that's the new moon, and it starts to increase. And this is why when we go to 1 Samuel chapter 20, we're just going to go straight to the point. Let's see if I can find it. I'm just going to go straight here to the 24th verse. So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon was come, the king sat him down to eat meat, and the king sat upon his seat, as at other times, even upon a seat by the wall. And Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, and David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul spake not anything that day, for he thought something had befallen him. He is not clean, surely he is not clean. So why, let's say if King David was unclean, why would he not show up for the new moon meal? Well, he said he's unclean, right? Because the new moon is actually a Sabbath. Amos 8:5 saying, when will the new moon be gone? These are the ones that sold corn and whatever the case may be, that we may sell corn. So why would they want the new moon to be gone so that they may sell corn? Because the new moon is a Sabbath. And the Sabbath that we may set forth wheat, see, making the ephah small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit. So pretty much they wanted the new moon or the Sabbaths to be gone, because the new moon is a Sabbath, and you could not sell on the Sabbath. And this is why when you look in the scale of things, new moons are usually always connected to the Sabbaths. When we go to Ezekiel, I believe that's chapter 46, is it? Right. And 1. Thus saith the Lord power, the gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut the 6 working days. Why? Because while people were working, this particular gate was not opened. It was closed. Why? Because it was only opened on certain days. But on the Sabbath it shall be open. So anytime it was a Sabbath, it would be open. And in the day of the new moon it shall be open. Why? Because the new moon also is a Sabbath. Okay? So Amos 8:5 saying, when will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath that we may set forth wheat? So going back to 1 Samuel, when King David didn't show up for the new moon, he said he was unclean. Why? Because he thought maybe something happened to where he became unclean because the new moon is a Sabbath. So he didn't say anything that day. And it came to pass on the morrow, meaning the day after the new moon, which was the what? The second day of the month, to show you that the calculations start from the new moon, day 1, Sabbath, then day 2, the next day. So when we go back to keeping the Passover, we go to Leviticus 23 and 4. These are the feasts of the Lord, even holy convocations, which you shall proclaim in their seasons. In the 14th day of the first month at even is the Lord's Passover. So how can the full moon be the new moon, right? And the new moon be the first day of the month, and then we would have to keep the Passover 14 days at evening later, which would be the 15th day, the beginning of the 15th day. So how can the new moon be the full moon when the count begins from the new moon as the first day? And we would not keep the Passover until the 14th day at evening. So it's impossible for the new moon to be the full moon. I hope y'all following along. All right? Because here it says, and it came to pass on the morrow, this is what? The day after the new moon, which was the second day of the month. So going by the scriptures, the count would start with the new moon, and you would have to count 14 days. And this is why when we go back to Psalms, the 81st chapter, and the 3rd verse, and we could go to one of the other translations, which is a little better, but let's say, blow up the trumpet in the new moon, really, and in the time appointed, which is what? The full moon on our solemn feast days. Let's see if we could find another one. Yeah, the CSB again. Blow the horn on the day of our feasts, during the new moon and during the full moon. Let's see what the NLT says. Right. Blow the ram's horn at new moon, and again at full moon, to call a festival. Right, because there were different sounds that a trumpet would make when calling in for the gathering of the congregation, or when you would go to war, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes you would have certain sounds that the horn would make, or the trumpet would make, that would only call the heads of the congregation. Sometimes they wanted the whole congregation to come in, so the horn would blow a certain way. Sometimes there was a warning that the enemy was coming. Sometimes there was a warning that there was war coming. So it all depended on what, the occasion was, on how that trumpet was to blow. All right, and they would always blow on the new moon it's the new moon. The moon's coming in. And then when there was a full moon, the middle of the month, it would blow again. It's not that hard. 1 Corinthians 14:7, and even things without life-giving sound, whether pipe or harp, except they give a distinction in the sounds, how shall it be known what is piped or harped? For if the trumpet give an uncertain sound, who shall prepare himself to the battle? Right, because you will have the trumpet blowing plus an alarm of war. If there was, war brewing brewing. It says, so likewise except you utter by the tongue words easy to be understood right, not speaking a different language, how shall it be known what is spoken? For you shall speak into the air, right? Because the people are not going to understand what you're saying. So, let's see what we got here. What else we got here? All right, so let's go to Ecclesiasticus 43:8 now. The month is called after her name. Right, this is why month and moon are synonymous. You could look it up. Increasing wonderfully in her changing. Right, because when the moon is new that's when it starts to increase. This is why you see the sliver of the moon. We could make this a little bigger. You see a little sliver there. Then it starts to wax, meaning it starts to grow. Then you have the first quarter. Then it continues to wax. You have 3 quarters. Then you have the full moon, which is the middle of the month. 2 weeks later, which is the 14th day, which the full moon would be the sign of feasts. The 14th day at evening, in the middle of the month, not at the beginning. The new moon is the beginning of the month. The full moon is the middle of the month. All right? And this is why the Lord set up the moon to change, because the moon was established as a timekeeper. You know? So it goes down to waning, meaning now it's starting to decrease. Why? Because the decreasing is what? It's the moon coming back around to reset itself until it becomes totally dim, but it's still light. And then what happens? The cycle begins again. Like Elder Apostle Tara says, we didn't have any, calendars that were pinned to the trees in the wilderness. Okay, Joshua and Caleb, make sure y'all pin up those calendars, because we want to make sure that Israel keep them days correct. They didn't have that. You had men that would watch the stars. They would watch the phases of the moon, the phases of the sun, and all of that. As we read about Issachar. All right, it says, being an instrument of the armies above, shining in the firmament of heaven. Yeah, because that's what it was created to do, to shine. And even when it's a new moon, it's still shining, but it's just dim. When you're at home and you have your lights on and you have a dimmer and you put the light very, very low so you can get a nice, atmosphere. You might be playing a little jazz music, might be sipping a little yayan just to relax, get your mind off of the day, take the edge off. Is that light dark? No, it's just dim. It's still a light, but it's dim. So it's still shining, but it's not shining as bright. It's not that hard. It's not that hard. It says, the beauty of heaven, the glory of the stars, an ornament giving light in the highest places of the Lord. Right, because there were 2 lights created. The greater light, as we read here, Genesis 1:14, the power said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And the power made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, which is the sun, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And the power set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. So even when the moon is new, it's still a light, but it's just not as bright. It's dim. And this is why it goes through the phases, because what it is doing, it's keeping time. It's like a clock. You have the second hand, you have the minute hand, you have the hour hand, and it keeps going around. So that's what the moon is. The moon is the natural watch or clock of the heavens. And this is what we were following. And I don't know specifically, because I've never actually seen the high priest Ariel putting the calendars together. We would just get the calendars. But I know that he was going by the new moons to calculate time. And even in the scriptures, it tells us that Abib is the beginning of the month. When you go to the book of Exodus, I believe that's Exodus 12:1. And this is around the time when we were delivered, our forefathers were delivered out of Egypt. Exodus 12:1, and the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month, Salakia, shall be unto you what? The beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. And then another scripture, I believe it's the 13th chapter, if I'm not mistaken, it calls the month Abib. Right. Exodus 13:4. This day came you out in the month of Abib. So this was the first month. And that was around the time of the spring, with the spring equinox. And I know that was big because there was a show back then that the elders were on. And High Priest Yeshaya was his name back then, was on the show. And these two Amalekites were on the panel, and they was chuckling and giggling. And they said, well, how do you calculate the Passover? You know, they were laughing at him. And he just gave him this smirk, and he started breaking it down. He said, well, it goes according to the vernal equinox, depending on when the new moon comes in. I forget exactly how he put it. But by the time he finished speaking, they just looked at him like, oh, shit. They didn't expect that, because they don't respect us. You see? And he totally fucked their whole world up. You know, so I know that those were the but like I said, I never witnessed it myself, so I can't really speak on it, you know, in detail. But I know that those are some of the, you know, because this is what Elder Pastor taught us in Connecticut, because we all, when we were coming up, we all had to learn everything. You know, we had to learn how to be priests, do the Passover service, do the Sabbath service, you know, take all of the tests. You know, we had to learn, you know, how to make a calendar. We all had to make our own individual calendars. You know, there was a lot of, you know, messing up. But the thing is that's what gave us the ability to perfect it all. Beautiful. Let me read this precept that the brother put up. Psalms 104:19. He appointed the moon for seasons. See, the sun knoweth is going down. Right, because you have what? 4 seasons in a year, which breaks down to about 3 months a year. You know, and everything is calculated around the moon, which is set up for signs and seasons and days and years. All right, so this nonsense about the new moon is a full moon is just that nonsense. You know? And if, you know, if the bishop, or I'm Salakia, did I say bishop? The General Nathaniel Alaga will get off his high horse and look into this again, he will see that he's dead wrong. You know? But we'll see what happens. So with that, I pray that you brothers and few sisters have been edified. To the next time I say, Shalom.